Within the shadowed corridors of historic time, underneath layers of Roman triumph and Japanese sands, there lies the story of a lady who rose like a storm from the Syrian wasteland. Her title used to be Zenobia, Queen of Palmyra, rebel empress, and considered one of history's most distinct forgotten monarchs. The Roman Empire trembled below her ambition, but her name, like town she ruled, paled into dust. This is her story. The rose of the east, the Syrian metropolis of Palmyra, also called Tadmor in Aramaic, stood like a jewel in the barren region, a cultural crossroads between east and west. It was once a city of Greek philosophers, Persian merchants, Aramaic poets, and Roman governors. Towering columns, caravanserais stuffed with silk and incense, and temples built to gods both international and native, gave Palmyra its particular identification. Zenobia born, this world-round 240 advert, a time of chaos and change. The Roman Empire was magnificent by way of the hindrance of the 1/3 century. Plagues, usurpers, invasions, and fiscal smash crippled the as soon as mighty civilization. In the eastern provinces, the concern was even more precarious. Persia pushed difficult on Rome's Jap flank. Zenobia's heritage was noble, if now not imperial. Her lineage was once a mixture of Arab and Hellenistic blood, and she claimed descent from the noted Cleopatra VII of Egypt, a daring announcement. Person who hinted at her future aspirations. She was fluent in multiple languages, Aramaic, Greek, Latin, and Egyptian, and used to be expert in philosophy and classical history. Even as different females of noble rank lived in seclusion, Zenobia used to be recognized to experience horses, hunt alongside generals, and engage in spirited debate with scholars. However, her real rise commenced together with her marriage to Odaenathus, the robust ruler of Palmyra, who used to be technically a Roman purchaser king, however clearly the de facto sovereign of Syria. Odaenathus was once Rome's Japanese bulwark, having defended the empire from Persian invasions and earning honors from the Roman emperor. Collectively, he and Zenobia ruled a rich and semi-impartial kingdom. That semi-independence would soon turn into anything far better, and a long way more unsafe. A widow's fury in 267 AD, tragedy struck. Odaenathus and his eldest son had been assassinated under murky occasions, in all likelihood via jealous courtiers, and even by using Rome itself. The political vacuum left behind might have led to the cave-in of Palmyra. However, Zenobia acted quickly. She declared her son Vabilethus the rightful heir, and named herself as regent. Yet this used to be no passive guardianship. Zenobia took full manage of the military, the court docket, and overseas coverage. Inside a year, she used to be with ease queen in all. However, name Palmyra's military had grown robust below Odaenathus, fit hardened from campaigns in opposition to the Persians, and dependable to their queen. Zenobia recruited even more warriors from wasteland tribes, including camel-mounted Bedouins and armored cataphracts, creating a drive that would soon task the Khud of Rome itself. What began as a mission to stabilize Palmyra soon modified into an empire-building crusade. Between 269 and 271 AD, Zenobia launched a series of army expeditions across the close east. Her generals conquered Egypt, expelling the Roman governor and taking manage of the Nile's grain, Rome's lifeblood. She seized elements of Syria, Palestine, and Asia Minor. By way of 270, the Eastern Roman Empire from the Euphrates to the Nile was beneath Zenobia's rule. Though she claimed to act in Rome's title on behalf of her son, it was once increasingly clear. Palmyra was once not a client state, it was once a rival empire. 3. The queen in her court dockets, Zenobia's court in Palmyra, grew to be a spectacle of Eastern grandeur and Western sophistication. She surrounded herself with philosophers, historians, and warriors. Among them was Cassius Longinus, a Greek philosopher who had studied underneath Plotinus and became one among her closest advisors. She promoted devout tolerance and multicultural administration. Coins minted for the period of this time bore the pictures of both her son and the Roman emperor at first. However, quickly, Zenobia's ambition broke by way of the skinny veil of loyalty. She began to type herself Augusta and Vabilathus Augustus, titles reserved only for emperors and empresses. The minting of cash with such inscriptions was once a right-away project to Roman authority. Zenobia adopted many points of Roman and Egyptian regal sort, combining the militaristic imagery of Roman emperors with the divine aura of the pharaohs. Her pics mostly confirmed her with the royal diadem, a nod to Cleopatra and the Ptolemies, signaling now not best vigor, but legacy. In Egypt, she was hailed as Queen of Kings, and temples held her identify in hieroglyphs. In Antioch and Alexandria, her snapshots seemed on civic inscriptions. Palmyra, as soon as outpost, now looked like the capital of the East. IV. The Lion of Rome responds. Rome might no longer ignore her. In 270 AD, Emperor Aurelian got here to energy, a normal of quality, talent, and severity. Aurelian was once decided to restore the crumbling empire. His crusade to retake the East commenced in 271, following his victories towards Germanic tribes on the Danube. Zenobia, ever defiant, ready for war. Her generals had been confident. Palmyrene forces had held Persia at bay and captured Egypt. The desert terrain, Palmyra's fortifications, and nearby alliances gave her a potential. However, Aurelian used to be now not Gallienus or Claudius. He used to be disciplined, ruthless, and totally dedicated to reuniting the empire. Aurelian swept through Asia Minor, chopping off Zenobia's western territories. He defeated her forces on the combat of Imai, and once more at Emissar. The Palmyrene navy, though courageous, would no longer enshape the well-equipped Roman legions. Zenobia fled to Palmyra, hoping the city would stand up to siege. For a time, it did, but as meals provides dwindled and morale faltered, the queen tried a determined breakout across the wasteland on camelback. Searching for Persian support, she under no circumstances made it. Aurelian's cavalry captured her close, the Euphrates River, with Zenobia in chains. Palmyra surrendered. The destiny of the wasteland. Queen Zenobia's fate remains one of the most satisfactory ancient enigmas. In step with one account, she was once brought to Rome in golden chains and paraded via the streets for the period of Aurelian's triumph, symbol of imperial dominance. But unlike different captured rulers, she was no longer carried out. As a substitute, Aurelian could have spared her, both out of admiration or political calculation. Some reviews say she married a Roman senator and lived out her days in cozy exile in Tiber ultramodern Tivoli. Others propose she died in captivity, defiant to the end. No definitive report tells us her genuine destiny. What we do comprehend is this: after her fall, Palmyra rebelled once more. Aurelian overwhelmed the uprising and destroyed much of town. The Asuna's glorious jewel of the wilderness was once decreased to ruins. Its columns still stand in these days, mute witnesses to an empire that might have been. The legacy left in Sandwai is Zenobia no longer remembered with the equal awe as Cleopatra, Boudica, or Catherine the Great. Maybe on the grounds that she misplaced, probably on account that Rome wrote the historical past books. However, Zenobia's story is certainly one of brilliance, bravery, and ambition unmatched in her time. She dared to carve an empire from the chaos. She dominated with intellect and mettle, and for a moment, transient and blinding, she held the destiny of the Roman East in her arms. Zenobia was once no puppet queen. She used to be a philosopher warrior, a strategist, a mom, and a monarch who rose from the fringes of empire to mission, its very heart. She dominated no longer as a placeholder, however, as a conqueror. Historical past could have pushed her into the shadows, but her mild, just like the solar over the wasteland ruins of Palmyra, nonetheless burns for those who seek it. The heart of medieval Cairo, past the minarets and bustling souk, behind the thick partitions of the castle, plots brewed like tea within the brass pots of the courtiers. Egypt was once not dominated by kings born to crowns, however, by way of warriors born to chains. Among them was once one who would briefly wear the sultan's mantle, not as a conqueror, however, as a grasp of manipulation. Baybars al. His name is forgotten, his reign disregarded, but his story is certainly one of survival in a world where energy was once written in blood and loyalty was once bought with metal. I Mamluk, slave, warrior, kingmaker. To appreciate Baybars al, we have to first realize the strange and brutal world of the Mamluks. The Mamluks have been enslaved, Boyster, Circassians and Kipchaks taken from the steppes and Caucasus as kids, converted to Islam, and knowledgeable in Cairo and Damascus in the arts of war, loyalty, and administration. They had been outsiders, grew to become insiders, forbidden from passing power to their sons. Their strength was once their shared brotherhood. their weak point. The knives they carried in their sleeves. Baybars al-Manshuri was one among them. Kipchak, Turk, sold into slavery sometime within the early 13th century, purchased via a excessive rating emir in Egypt, and informed the elite barracks of the Manchuria, the corps situated by using Sultan He earned his identify al-Manshuri from this corps, an elite unit of deadly cavalry who would end up the kingmakers of the Mamluk Sultanate. He rose by means of the ranks not as a battlefield hero, however as a master of paperwork, court, docket intrigue, and record maintaining. He was once literate, persuasive, and ruthlessly loyal to his customers until it now not served him. For many years, he served below a succession of strong sultans, Kalawan, Al-Ashraf, Khalil, and Muhammad. He compiled annals, chronicled campaigns, and controlled correspondence, and in time, he became the Nib al-Sultanah, the Sultan's viceroy. But Baybars al-Manshuri desired extra. The throne of Cairo was once never out of reach for a person who knew everyone's secrets and techniques. 2. The fragile throne of the Nile. Egypt within the late 13th and early 14th centuries was a world teetering between greatness and crumple. The Mamluks had recently defeated the Mongols at Ain, Jalut in 1260 and expelled the Crusaders from the Levant. They ruled the richest land within the Islamic world, controlling alternate from India to Europe, and commanding armies of elite cavalry feared throughout the area. Yet their political method was a powder keg. Vigor did not pass by way of bloodline but through consensus or coercion among the emir. Sultans had been most of the time murdered, deposed, or exiled through their possessed guards. At any time, a strong emir could command more loyalty than the sultan himself. Through 1309, the boy sultan, Al-Nazar Muhammad 0.33 son of Kalawan had grown worn out of being a puppet. He had been sultan once before as a child, and once more after his brother's death. But at any time when real vigor lay with the senior emirs, now he sought a real rule. Baybars al-Manshuri stood at the core of this risky courtroom. He had survived many years of purges and energy shifts. However now, with al-Nasir Muhammad declaring manage and planning to crush the overmighty emirs, Baybars confronted an option: support the boy king or become a member of folks that would dethrone him. He selected ambition. 3. A sultan in 1309, after carefully manipulating the emirs of Cairo and playing to their worry of al-Nasir's reforms, Baybars al-Manshuri helped orchestrate a coup. Al-Nasir used to be compelled to abdicate and flee to Karak in Transjordan. Into the vacuum stepped Baybars to al-Manshuri, now sultan, in each identify indeed. However, this was no triumphant coronation. Baybars' ascension used to be seen with the aid of many as an act of betrayal in opposition to a sultan who had, for all his youth, tried to revive steadiness to Egypt. Although Baybars claimed he had the legitimacy of the emirs and the Qadi decide, his rule used to be tainted from the start. His reign lasted barely a number of months, handiest, lengthy ample to have an understanding of that the throne he had so long manipulated from behind was a long way extra hazardous when sat upon. Discovered, as others earlier than him had, that within the Mamluk approach, power was once certainly not personal, it was once conditional, transferring, and fragile. The emirs who had supported his coup now demanded favors. The provinces, principally Syria, resented his rule. The populace of Cairo whispered of his treachery. And worse, al-Nasir Muhammad used to be no longer long gone. In Karak, the young ex-sultan began rallying support. Letters were smuggled into Damascus, urging loyalty. Syria, continuously cautious of Cairo's dominance, shifted its allegiance again to al-Nasir. And Baybars, the grasp of politics, commenced to unravel. IV. The fall of a kingmaker. Just a few months after seizing energy, Baybars confronted the unthinkable. His own vigor base grew to become in opposition to him. The emirs, fearing uprising from Syria and unrest in Cairo, started out to question whether keeping Baybars on the throne was worth the instability he had brought. By means of July 1309, pressure set up. A council of emirs met in secret. Even Baybars' closest allies now saw him as a legal responsibility. On a summer season nighttime, Baybars al-Manshuri used to be summoned to the fortress. There, within the high-quality chamber of marble and placing lamps, he used to be advised the decision: he would abdicate or be removed. Baybars resisted, but he had no troops loyal sufficient to combat. Without a bloodshed, he stepped down and used to be imprisoned. Al-Nasser Muhammad returned from Karak, this time decided to not be anybody's puppet again. The boy sultan used to be now a man, and Baybars was once now a prisoner. The last. Baybars al-Manshuri didn't die instantly after his fall. For a time, he was saved below close watch, residing inside the walls of the fort, allowed to write down and reflect, but barred from any have an effect on. He lowered back to what he had executed in his formative years, writing historical past. Correctly, a lot of what we all know in regards to the Mamluk courtroom from this technology comes from his chronicles. Together with the Zubdat al-Fikra and Tufat al-Nazar, his viewpoint is biased. Naturally, he paints his own movements as noble, vital, and loyal. However, inside the folds of his textual content, we see a man deeply mindful of the cruel cycle of power he once helped turn. Finally, below suspicion of plotting, as soon as again Baybars al-Manshuri used to be completed quietly through Al-Nasr Muhammad's marketers, silencing eternally a person who had as soon as controlled the destiny of sultans. Echoes within the Stone Baybars. Al-Manshuri is not often spoken of in these days. He is overshadowed by way of greater Mamluk sultans like Baybars I, Kalawan, and Al-Nasr Muhammad. His reign is dismissed as a footnote, temporary, inglorious, and bloodless. But his actual legacy lies in different places, in the way he formed the court docket, in the records he left at the back of, and in the lives he manipulated. He used to be the archetype of the courtier became ruler, a man who understood that, in a system of army slavery, the pen used to be often extra dangerous than the sword hand he wielded each. Baybars al-Manshuri will have ruled for handiest a whisper of time. However, that whisper exhibits volumes about the darkish machinery of Mamluk Egypt, a realm of eunuchs and emirs, of vigor purchased with betrayal, and of rulers who rose no longer from royal blood, however, from the crucible of survival. This chapter will transport us to medieval West Africa. The place of forgotten empress held sway over one of the crucial, greatest yet least remembered empires on the earth, the Mali Empire. Her title used to be Saqqara, and though historical past most commonly misrecords her as a man because of confined documentation, compelling proof elements to a feminine regent or corolla whose reign stabilized and multiplied. Mali, in the decades between its two most noted monarchs, Sundiata, Keita, and Mansa Musa, allow us to inform the story of one in every of Africa's most overlooked sovereigns. Chapter 3. Saqqara of Mali, the forgotten monarch of the Gold Empire. Within the golden dunes between the Niger and Senegal rivers, the place caravans shimmered like serpents beneath the sun, and cities like Timbuktu echoed with knowledge and wealth. There rose a ruler whose identifier has faded, just like the dirt swept across the Sahel. Her reign was once transient but enormous. She introduced peace to a fractured land, opened Mali to the arena beyond the Sahara, and paved the road for Mansa Musa's legendary age. Her title was once Saqqara Empress, Regent, Reformer. Her story has been shrouded. However, her legacy stays buried within the gold of empires. The Empire of Sundiata, a land of gold and blood. The Mali Empire, headquartered within the early 13th century by means of Sundiata Keita, was one of the vital, greatest and richest empires in African historical past. It spanned from the Atlantic coast deep into the guts of the Sahel, controlling key trans-Saharan alternate routes, and the legendary gold mines of Wangara. Sundiata had united the Mandinka people after years of struggle towards the Soso kingdom. His victory on the fight of Kirina in 1235 forged the foundations of Mali and made him a legend determined, later deified in oral way of life as the Lion King of Mali. However, empires rarely remain united after their founders move. By means of the late 13th century, the Keita dynasty used to be fractured by way of succession crises, rival claimants, and regional revolts. A series of susceptible kings and regents resulted in unrest. Alternate slowed, rival kingdoms demonstrated Mali's borders, and the capital at Niani grew unstable. On this chaos emerged Saqqara, a name rarely spoken in the chronicles of Islamic travelers but whispered in the Griot studies as one who ruled like iron and healed like rain. 2. Who used to be Saqqara? The historic identification of Saqqara is elusive and contested. Arabic chroniclers like Ibn Khaldun point out a ruler named Saqqara, describing him as a former slave who rose to energy, probably a freedman of the Keita royal household. Some endorse he was once an army commander. Others consider he seized the throne in a coup, but African oral traditions handed down by means of griots. The dwelling libraries of West Africa preserve an extra nuanced account. In a few types of the Epic of Sundiata, a feminine figure named Sakura or Secure appears as a regent or elder matron, depended on via the royal condominium in the course of times of problem. Could these two Sakuras be the equal? A few historians and African students argue that the determined Ibn Khaldun, known as Sakura, was once both a strong queen regent who dominated in her possess, identify, or a feminine co-ruler, performing via a young or incapacitated male monarch. The gender misattribution is normal in medieval Islamic chronicles, which commonly downplayed or misrepresented feminine rulership external, the Islamic Heartlands. What is apparent, whether male or feminine, Sakura ruled Mali, and underneath their management, the empire did not just live to tell the tale, it thrived. 3. The reformer of Niani. When Sakura took energy seemingly in the 1290s, the empire was in disarray. As a substitute, then snatch, control through drive. She seems to have governed through consensus, brokering peace between rival noble residences, appeasing regional governors, and providing land and titles to loyal generals. This political acumen suggests no longer a mere usurper, but any person deeply embedded within the royal structure. Sakura instituted economic and administrative reforms that revitalized Mali. Gold and salt trade resumed. Caravans lower back to cities like Timbuktu, Gao and Jen, bringing silks, ceramics, and manuscripts from North Africa and Arabia. The Dwanda administrative councillors to be restructured to incorporate representatives of extra areas and tribes. A transfer that stabilized the delicate team spirit of the empire. Sakura's court docket welcomed scholars, jurists, and retailers. It used to be in the course of this time that Mali recentered formal diplomatic members of the family with the Hafsid dynasty of Tunis, and potentially with the Marinids of Morocco. These contacts helped spread Islamic learning in the course of Mali, main to the emergence of madrasas, Islamic colleges, and the flourishing of Arabic literacy within the empire. Sakura additionally promoted justice reform, appointing Qadis judges not from noble lineages, but from learned men of the Islamic faculties, a progressive act that balanced normal African justice methods with Islamic jurisprudence. 4. The pilgrimage to Mikoth. Most outstanding, historically recorded event of Sakura's rule was once her pilgrimage to Mecca, often called the Hajj. Long earlier than Mansa Musa's famously extravagant experience, Sakura became the primary identified ruler of Mali to participate in the Hajj. Her ride possible took situation within the early 1300s and would have concerned journeying. This pilgrimage was now not simply an act of piety, was an announcement of international legitimacy. With the aid of performing the Hajj, Sakura placed Mali no longer as a peripheral pagan land, however, as a full member of the Islamic world. Her entourage carried presents of gold and ivory. Wonderful the courts of Cairo and past Egyptian chroniclers have been awed by way of the wealth of the travelers, who wore gold-woven garments and dispensed coins at each discontinue. In Cairo, Sakura's delegation doubtless met with the Mamluk Sultan, most likely al-Nasser Muhammad, for the period of his early reign. The pilgrimage forged monetary and religious alliances that might improve Mali for generations to come back. Betrayal and disappearance. But no throne in Mali was cozy for lengthy. As Sakura lower back from Mecca, his status now spreading across the Islamic world, individuals of the Keita dynasty plotted her elimination. Envy of her accomplishments, worry of her legitimacy, and resentment of her humble origins festered in the hearts of people who believed most effective descendants of Sundiata will have to rule. At the same time, the small print remained murky. Oral sources recommend that Sakura was ambushed and killed near the borders of Mali, in all probability by means of royalist forces. The Keita household swiftly reasserted control, crowning Mansa Chua, relative of Sundiata, as the brand new sultan. Sakura's title was systematically erased from imperial documents. Chronicles passed from the reign of Sundiata to Mansa Musa, with most effective a brief mention of a usurper in Islamic money owed. Sakura is remembered as a former slave. In local Griot histories, she is repeatedly remembered as the regent queen who saved Mali. Her tomb, if it ever existed, remains lost to the sands. The golden bridge to Mansa Musa. Without Sakura, there were no Mansa Musa. The infrastructure, she reformed the trade networks, she reopened and the political stability she restored allowed Musa to upward push unchallenged and inherit a golden empire. Mansa Musa's wealth and pilgrimage could have eclipsed all before him in fame. However, the empire he ruled had been rebuilt, restructured, and reconnected to the world with the aid of a ruler the world forgot. Saqqara's pilgrimage, although humbler, set the precedent. Her reforms supplied the model. Her diplomatic overtures laid the groundwork for Mali's entry into the Islamic Golden Age, and her tragic finish reminds us of the perils confronted via those who lead no longer with royal blood, but with benefit and wisdom. VII. Legacy in dust and music today. The name Saqqara is little identified even inside Mali itself. Textbooks skip over her rule. Monuments undergo no mark of her time. However, in the songs of griots, fragments of her story live on. They speak of a lady of iron will and wasteland knowledge, a ruler who bore no title but wielded titanic energy, a pilgrim who crossed one half a continent, now not for self-importance however, to elevate her humans within the eyes of the sector. She used to be a queen and not using a crown, a regent with no lineage, and a sovereign without a statue, but her shadow touches the whole lot that followed from the glowing libraries of Timbuktu to the gold-dusted halls of Cairo that remembered Mali's caravans with awe. And in that shadow, we see the shape of greatness forgotten, yes, but on no account truly lost. This time, we experienced the monstrous forests and misty rivers of Japanese Europe. The place a strong and problematic determined reigned, Queen Tamar of Georgia. Although revered in Georgian history, her exclusive reign as a feminine monarch within the 12th–13th centuries remains largely unknown to the broader world. Tamar defied the expectations of her generation, consolidated a fractured realm, and developed what many call the Golden Age of Georgia, a kingdom that rivaled Byzantium in artwork, army vigor, and diplomacy. Yet outside her homeland, she is barely remembered. Chapter 4. Tamar, the warrior queen of the Caucasus and the Caucasus Mountains, where snow crowns the peaks and the rivers thunder by means of pine-choked valleys, rose a queen, not like any the arena had recognized. Her topics referred to as her King of Kings, her enemies called her unstoppable, and her reign became a fractured Christian outpost into some of the robust kingdoms of the medieval world. She was Tamar, daughter of David, sovereign of Georgia, and, though her title has light from world reminiscence, the light of her rule as soon as shone as brightly as any solar in Christendom. A daughter crowned in a person's world. Tamar used to be born around 1160 into the Bagrationi dynasty, which had dominated Georgia for hundreds of years. Her father, King George III, fought to centralize vigor in a kingdom nonetheless fragile after generations of internal divisions and external invasions from Seljuk Turks in the east to rebellious nobles inside. Tamar's mother, Berdukan, was once a Vasician, the aristocracy, and her have an impact on helped instill in Tamar both the Christian orthodoxy of Georgia and the fierce, martial heritage of the mountain tribes. However, the world Tamar was born into was once now not capable for a woman to rule. In 1178, while still alive, King George III topped his daughter as Monarcha, strategic move to comfy the dynasty and prevent uprising after his dying. Although she held the crown, Tamar was surrounded by using robust nobles, most of whom believed a lady could not rule on my own. When her father died in 1184, Tamar, barely 24 years historic, stood by myself on the helm of the kingdom. The court expected her to serve as a puppet beneath male advisors. Alternatively, she outmaneuvered all of them. 2. Struggles for vigor. The queen, underneath siege. Tamar's first years as sole ruler had been anything however comfy. The nobility, primarily the excessive aristocracy referred to as the Asnari, tried to strip her of government vigor. They demanded a council of male guardians to advise her, insisted on choosing her husband, and sought to extra-manipulate over royal appointments and land promises. Tamar used to be pressured to consider to some demands at least quickly. Underneath stress, she married Yuri Bogolyubsky, a Russian prince from the exiled Kievan royal family. However, Yuri proved to be arrogant, violent, and politically ambitious. He abused his position and dealt with Tamar like a figurehead. In a stunning move that bowled over the courtroom and clergy, Tamar divorced him in 1186, rare act of female independence in medieval Christendom, and banished him from Georgia. Yuri would later return on the head of a rebellion, which Tamar crushed together with her loyal forces. Tamar's message used to be clear. She used to be no puppet. She was a queen in each feel of the word. Architect of an empire after consolidating interior power. Tamar set her points of interest outward. Between 1190 and 1210, Tamar's armies marched beyond the Georgian heartland, capturing key cities in Armenia, Azerbaijan, and elements of northern Iran and Anatolia. Her generals, certainly the legendary Zachariah Makaj-Vezeli, led campaigns that seized the fortress cities of Ani Divine and cast strategic and symbolic objectives. These victories were not effortlessly military feats. Tamar's expansionism had clear religious and ideological objectives. She styled herself as King of Kings and Queen of Queens, a title reserved for imperial rulers, and declared her mission to shield Orthodox Christianity in an area more and more dominated via Islamic dynasties and Latin crusaders. At her height, Tamar's Georgia stretched from the Black Sea to the Caspian, and from the highlands of the Caucasus to the lowlands of Persia. But in contrast to many conquerors, Tamar didn't impose oppression on her new territories. She maintained nearby autonomy, allowed devout diversity, and supported colleges, churches, and exchange in captured cities. This approach helped win the loyalty of Armenian nobles, Kurdish warlords, and even some Muslim leaders who preferred Tamar's governance to that of rival Islamic emirates. IV. Culture, commerce, and the Georgian Renaissance. Even as Tamar used to be a conqueror on the battlefield, she was once additionally a client of art, literature, and theology, and theologia's in what is now referred to as Georgia's Golden Age. Underneath her reign, Tbilisi became some of the wealthiest cities within the Caucasus. Caravans passed via from critical Asia, Persia, and Byzantium. Silk, spices, weapons, and books flowed by way of the capital, enriching both the crown and the citizenry. Tamar personally patronized monasteries and universities. She funded new architectural wonders, together with the Vardzia Cave Monastery, a sprawling trichy carved into the cliffs above the Mtfari River. The monastery housed monks, students, soldiers, and over 600 rooms, including a royal chapel with frescoes of Tamar herself, one of the vital few surviving depictions of her visage. This era saw the upward push of Shota Rustaveli, the countrywide poet of Georgia, whose epic The Night in the Panther's Epidermis used to be dedicated to Tamar. The poem, filled with chivalric codes, romantic valor, and mystic imagery, solid Tamar now not simply as a ruler, but as a divine symbol of justice and charm. Diplomacy and didn't only rule through conquest, she also conducted amazing diplomacy, enjoying Latin crusaders, Byzantine emperors, Seljuk sultans, and Muslim emirs towards every different. When the Fourth Crusade sacked Constantinople in 1204, Tamar used the possibility to aid a rival Byzantine offshoot in Trebizond. She hooked up her relative Alexios Komnenos as emperor, easily turning Trebizond right into a Georgian protectorate and buffer state. She also maintained ties with faraway Christian powers, including the Armenian and Cilician courts, and is believed to have dispatched correspondence to the papacy, although she remained a staunch defender of Japanese orthodoxy. Meanwhile, Georgian vigor projected into the Caspian Sea, where the Georgian fleet raided Muslim-held islands and port cities. Her reign marked the final period of Christian dominance in the Caucasus before the Mongol invasions. The queen passes into legend. Tamar died in 1213, after almost a long time of rule. Her ultimate resting location remains unknown. Some consider she was once buried on the Gelati Monastery, others in a hidden mountain tomb, very similar to Alexander the Nice. Her son, George IV Lasher, succeeded her. However, the Mongol invasions soon after would shake the Georgian kingdom to its core. The empire Tamar built survived for just a few generations after her. However, its cultural and country-wide legacy continued for hundreds of years. In Georgian memory, she grew to become greater than a monarch. She grew to be a saint, canonized by using the Georgian Orthodox Church. In art and folklore, she used to be portrayed as each a shrewd queen and a warrior king bearing a sword in a single hand and a scroll within the different. However, in the wider world, her story liked Western Europe on no account truly grasped the scope of her reign. Muslim chroniclers acknowledged her only in passing, and as history became increasingly dominated by means of narratives from bigger empires, Tamar of Georgia disappeared from the arena stage. the shadow of glory tamer. The Nice reigned at a time when few women might command armies, forge empires, or venture the gendered assumptions of monarchy. She dominated as a woman in a man's title and excelled now, not regardless of it. But since she was uniquely perfect to her age, she was once a diplomat and warrior, a theologian and builder, a poet's muse and a people's protector. Her vision of a Christian empire within the Caucasus grew to be a high-water mark for Georgian identity, an era to which the nation still looks for pride and proposal. Her absence from most world histories isn't a reflection of her insignificance, however, of the chroniclers who selected to ignore her. Yet in the ruins of Vardzia, in the ink of Rustaveli, and in the minds of hundreds of thousands who still bear her name, Tamar the Excellent lives on. Earlier than the Inca, before Pizarro, and earlier than the Spanish galleons carved their manner up the western coast of South the United States, there was a city of partitions and silence golden, huge, and humming with the secrets and techniques of a forgotten people. That city used to be Chan Chan, the capital of the Chima Empire, and its ultimate ruler, Minchankman, stood in opposition to the tide of imperial domination. Though his identifiers all, however, vanished from textbooks, his world was one among profound complexity, fragile defiance, and vanished beauty. The rise of the Chima, lords of the north coast. The Chima Empire rose in the wake of the fall of the Mocha civilization in the 9th century. From their coastal heartland along the Mocha and Santa River valleys, they developed a culture that blended Mocha creative brilliance with administrative innovation and military ambition. Through the 13th century, the Chima had become the dominant vigor in northern Peru, extending from Tums within the north just about to Lima in the south. Their empire was founded on Chan Chan, a sprawling city of adobe palaces, ceremonial plazas, and big storage complexes, masking over 20 square kilometers higher than another city in the Americas. Earlier than the upward push of Tenochtitlan, Chima did not construct in stone but in mud brick, redecorating their palaces with elaborate friezes depicting marine life, mythological creatures, and summery waves. They engineered subtle irrigation techniques, developed roads, and operated a state-managed financial system situated on tribute, textile construction, metallurgy, and fishing. The Chima rulers, known as Sikik, were regarded They lived in remote compounds, and have been succeeded now, not by using sons however, by appointed nobles, reflecting a complex dynastic structure based on benefit, ritual selection, and elite consensus. Into this majestic empire, around the early 15th century, got here Minchankman, the final and most defiant of the Chima kings. 2. Minchankman's early reign. Glory within the West. The ancient important points of Minchankman's early lifestyles are sparse, filtered by way of later Inca narratives and archaeological inference. What we do be aware of is that he rose to the throne for the duration of a period of unparalleled enlargement. Under his rule, the Chima Empire reached its greatest territorial extent. Coastal valleys and highland fringe zones got here below. Chima managed, and he restructured the executive system to allow tighter governance over far-off regions. Minchankman's court in Chanyankru to become one of the crucial opulent in the hemisphere. Archaeological discoveries from this interval show gold, silver, and copper objects of first-rate craftsmanship, exceptionally miniature representations of fish, birds, and sea mammals, all paying homage to the Chima's maritime roots. The palace partitions have been decorated with stylized wave patterns, fishnets, and geometric spirals, celebrating Enai, the ocean god, and reflecting the Chima's deeply aquatic cosmology. Rituals founded on water, fertility, and ancestral veneration performed a principal role in legitimizing Minchankman's rule. He additionally intensified state manipulate over craft construction. Goldsmiths, weavers, and potters have been relocated from conquered areas to Chan Chan to supply luxurious items for the elite. Artwork grew to be not simplest, a cultural symbol, however, an instrument of statecraft and tribute extraction. However, past the wealth and ritual, chants stirred in the east the place a new vigor. The Inca had begun its upward thrust. The shadow of Cusco, Inca ambitions be, using the mid-15th century. The Inca Empire, under Pachacati and his son Topa Inca Yupanqui, had begun a sweeping campaign of conquest from their capital in Cusco. They had already subdued powerful highland opponents like the Chanca and the Kola, and their ambitions grew to become toward the Pacific coast. The Chima, although powerful, had been vulnerable. Their empire, whilst wealthy and vast, used to be mostly coastal and depended on centralized irrigation infrastructure. A strike against these programs might cripple the financial system. Additionally, the Chima had no standing army comparable in dimension or coordination to the Inca navy computer, which moved with ruthless precision and discipline. Minchancaman tried diplomacy. First, there may be evidence that emissaries have been exchanged, and maybe presents provided. However, the Inca didn't need tribute, they wanted absorption. For the Inca, just one sun might shine over the Andes. Minchancaman fortified Xonchan and its surrounding valleys. He known as upon the coastal lords to ship troops and presents. For perhaps the primary time in Chima history, a confederation of regional forces was assembled to resist the invaders, but it will now not be ample. For the fall of Chanacros, the 1470s, Topa Inca Yupanqui, Pachacuti's notable navy son, led an expedition northward. Instead, then strike straight at Chanchan. He followed a process of attrition and isolation, focusing on the Chima's irrigation canals and tributary areas, reducing off meals and water to the capital. This calculated form of ecological battle devastated Chima resistance. After several months, probably even years of conflict, Chanchan surrendered. The Asuna's wonderful city, whose walls had never fallen in centuries, bowed to Cusco's son. Minchancaman, stripped of authority, was taken to Cuzco. In contrast to other enemies who had been performed or exiled, he was saved alive as a customer king, a dwelling symbol of Inca supremacy. The Incas allowed him to rule nominally over a small area, probably within the Mocha Valles, a vassal king, below tight Inca supervision. It was a calculated humiliation, to parade a one's mighty king as a loyal discipline. Va. Residing ghost in Cusco, Minchancaman became a ceremonial determine, introduced out for galas and rituals. His people, now underneath Inca governors, were absorbed into the Inca economic system. Chima artisans have been relocated to Cusco and other highland cities, forming artisan colonies that preserved Chima aesthetics, however served Inca purposes. Chanchan itself was once depopulated, in part dismantled, and administratively fragmented. Although the town used to be now not razed, it used to be symbolically hollowed out, a monument to a lost empire. Minchancaman spent the rest of his life a king in exile, a monarch who had ruled probably the most sophisticated polities in the Americas, now reduced to a ceremonial captive. There are not any surviving documents of his dying, no tomb, no ultimate assertion. His identifier survives handiest in Inca chronicles and oral recollections, fragmentary filtered through the lens of his conquerors. Vi. The legacy of the misplaced King Minchancaman's story isn't just the story of a fallen king, it is the story of a civilization silenced. The Chima have been master builders, engineers, and directors. Their working out of hydraulics, metallurgy, and urban planning rivaled the first-rate empires of the sector, but their achievements were subsumed into the myth of Inca supremacy, and later erased with the aid of the advent of the Spanish. Chan, as soon as home to 60,000 men and women, grew to be a ghost city, its adobe walls crumbling silently in the salt winds of Trujillo. Most effective in contemporary, a long time have archaeologists begun to get better the grandeur of the Chima and admire the role Minchancaman performed in keeping that empire together, unless its bitter finish. He used to be not a conqueror like Topa Inca, nor a divine emperor like Mansa Musa or Augustus. However, he was once a steward of one of the vital world's first-rate lost capitals, a person who confronted imperial obliteration with dignity, and whose folks' genius outlived him. Hidden in sand and shadow. VII. Within the dirt of Chan, these days, Minchancaman's identify is barely spoken. Vacationers stroll via the ruins of Chanchan, marveling on the fish motif partitions, the nice plazas, and the labyrinthine corridors. However, few understand the name of the king who reigned when town fell. His legacy, like the adobe walls around him, is weathered and fragile, yet each carved pelican, each sacred pond, each restored frieze is a whisper of his time, a reminder that empires don't die when they fall. They die when they're forgotten. And now, by way of this story, Minchancaman lives again. On this chapter, we experience two medieval Ethiopia, the place amid the rugged highlands and old church buildings of stone. There lived a queen whose name sparkles in legend and song but rarely in textbooks. Her identifier used to be Queen Guditsum, called Yodit, Judith, or Asatoand, within the 10th century. She allegedly burned church buildings, overthrew a dynasty, and reigned for 40 years over a kingdom reshaped via fire and vengeance. To some, she is a villain, to others, a liberator. However, one reality stays: her reign transformed Ethiopian historical past eternally. Chapter 6. Queen Gudit, the Hearth of the Highlands. They referred to as her the Flame of Aksum, a girl of iron will and bitter fury, who razed church buildings, toppled kings, and dominated a land carved into sky-piercing plateaus. In the shadowed folds of Ethiopia's highlands, where stone church buildings grasp the cliffs and legends are carved into rock, she emerged as each nightmare and queen, an icon of vengeance and vigor. A kingdom below the Goeth. In the 10th century, the kingdom of Aksum stood as some of the high-quality Christian empires of the arena. Considering the fact that its conversion within the 4th century, Aksum had been a center of alternate theology and imperial might, attaining from the southern Crimson coastline deep into the Ethiopian highlands. The empire was once strong, yes, but no longer invincible. By the 900s, Aksum was once in decline. Exchange routes shifted. Islam had begun to rise across the Pink Sea, and internal factions had been growing. Still, the kings of Aksum held speedy to their old lineages, tracing their descent from King Solomon of Israel and the Queen of Sheba, anchoring their divine right in centuries of sacred lifestyle. Enter Gudita girl, whose origins are contested, her causes debated, but whose have an impact on would echo throughout Ethiopia for 1,000 years. 2. The origins of Gudet, daughter of Rath. We do not know exactly who Gudit was once. Her legend comes to us fractured and politicized, filtered by way of oral histories, medieval texts, and ecclesiastical denunciations. Some sources declare she was once of Beta Israel, Ethiopian Jewish descent, enraged by Christian persecution of her humans. Others say she was a disinherited princess, denied her birthright, and raised in exile. Just a few even describe her as a changed pagan who became her again on each the church and its kings. What we do know is that she used to be charismatic, cunning, and brutal. She rallied followers among discontented nobles, marginalized peoples, and very likely devout minorities. Her rise was visible by the Christian elite as a rebellion in opposition to divine orderer, girl rising towards guise, fireplace towards religion, vengeance in opposition to the sacred throne. With the aid of the mid-10th century, Gudit launched her assault not simply against a king, but against an whole imperial subculture. 3. The burning of churches. What Gudit did subsequent earned her infamy for generations. Along with her followers, she stormed by means of the Ethiopian highlands, burning church buildings, desecrating monasteries, and razing sacred texts. The crown jewel of Aksumite Christendom, the Church of Our Woman Mary of Zion, mentioned to condominium, the Ark of the Covenant, was once allegedly desecrated or abandoned throughout her invasion. Dozens of rock-hewn churches, painstakingly carved into cliffs over centuries, were torched or looted. Some were rebuilt, others had been lost ceaselessly. Latest Christian chroniclers labeled her a hyena in woman's skin, a destroyer of Zion, an apostate queen of fireside. However, in the back of this vilification lies an extra truth. Gudit systematically dismantled Aksum's royal and ecclesiastical infrastructure, erasing centuries of imperial devout dominance in a calculated crusade of cultural destruction. She eradicated the ruling dynasty, killing the king and his heirs. Folks that survived fled to southern refuges or had been absorbed into minor noble residences, after which she did whatever no woman had achieved before in Aksumite history. She took the throne, for Gudit the ruler, queen of the highlands. What adopted used to be not just conquest but reign for 40 years. In line with Ethiopian and Arabic sources, Queen Gudit dominated massive portions of what had been the Aksumite Empire. Her capital used to be seemingly in the southern or western highlands, and her rule marked a dramatic geopolitical shift. She reshaped the aristocracy, broke priestly power, and reoriented exchange. Her courtroom used to be doubtless a combination of ancient highland customs and new vigor constructions. She didn't try to restoration, Aksum, she replaced it, crowning herself as a monarch. No longer of divine descent, however, of conquest. There's no known surviving architecture or textual content from her reign, her rule. Like her ascent, exists within the tension between legend and archaeology. What we do recognize is that for many years, Ethiopia's historic Christian heartland remained fractured and its monarchy extinguished in international documents, especially among Arab historians like al-Makrizi and Ibn Harkal. She is recounted no longer as delusion, however, as factor queen who destroyed Oxum and ruled as sovereign. One source even claims she sought marriage alliances with Muslim rulers across the Purple Sea, hinting at diplomatic ambitions that went beyond the highlands. The end of Gudit, vanished into shadow. Nobody is aware of precisely how Gudit's reign ended. Some accounts say she died of average causes, others that she was overthrown by a resurgent Christian prince or assassinated by internal competitors. What is apparent is that with the aid of the top of the 10th century, her dynasty light, the vacuum she left was once filled through the Zag dynasty, a new line of rulers most likely linked to Gudit with the aid of marriage or shared heritage who would rule Ethiopia for 2 centuries. Unlike the Axumites, the Zag rulers didn't claim descent from Solomon and Sheba. Rather, they forged a brand new devout legitimacy, building the noted churches of Lalibela, seeking religious renewal and countrywide rebirth after Gudit's fires. Her legacy, nonetheless, used to be now not forgotten. Christian scribes for centuries would blame Gudit for all manner of catastrophic famines, invasions, lost relics. Her name grew to be synonymous with blasphemy, chaos, and uprising. But among the many Beta Israel and distinctive southern oral traditions, she used to be remembered in a different way as a champion, a breaker of oppression, a queen who dared to rule. Vi Gudit's legacy, between demon and queen. What makes Queen Gudit so interesting is not only her violence, but her ambiguity. Used to be she a villain or a visionary, a destroyer or a liberator, a blasphemer or a reformer? We could not ever wholly understand. The historical record is just too fragmented, too biased. Yet her very existence is indisputable, corroborated throughout a couple of cultures, feared and remembered across centuries. Few feminine rulers in African historical past have been as robust or as reviled. In a world that placed dynasties claimed legitimacy through unbroken male traces, Gudit shattered that mannequin. She took energy no longer by way of marriage or inheritance, but by means of drive, ruling now not as consort, not as regent, but as sovereign. Her reign reminds us that history just isn't always written by using the victors. It is customarily written via the survivors and those who lived to tell the tale, just like the Christian chroniclers of later centuries wrote her as a warning. However, what if she was once greater than that? What if she was a replicate reflecting the brokenness of an empire, the fury of the forgotten, and the fires that come when power is denied for too long? 7. Echoes in the highlands today. Oxum nonetheless stands, its obelisks weathered through time, its churches rebuilt, its monks chanting prayers in historical Ge'ez. However, within the silence between hymns, there stays a hint of good queen who once burned these halls. Modern-day Ethiopian historians are reanalyzing her legacy, looking to separate fable from reality. Feminist scholars explore her as a symbol of resistance. The Beta Israel bear in mind her as both ancestor and icon. And in the darkened hills where oral histories still echo, ancient females whisper her, identify with a mix of awe and dread. She may be forgotten in world textbooks. However, she has under no circumstances truly vanished. She stays, just like the flame in her name, flickering, detrimental, enduring. Introduction. Within the annals of African historical past, few figures loom as giant and as defiantly as Queen Ningea of Ndongo and Matomba. Born in 1583 within the highlands of what is at present Angola, Njinga would rise from the royal residence of the Mbandu individuals to become a logo of resistance against European colonization. Her reign spanned over for tumultuous a long time, from 1624, except her death in 1663, a period marked by means of relentless conflict, political intrigue, and diplomatic brinksmanship. But, despite her huge influence on the course of important African historical past, she remains mostly forgotten in world historic narratives. Nginga's story is one among survival and sovereignty in an age of imperial growth, at a time when Portugal sought to consolidate its vigor over the African coast, and inside, Njinga, not most effective, resisted colonization, but developed a durable state, negotiated on equal footing with European powers, and wielded authority In a patriarchal world with unparalleled strategic brilliance, her existence embodies the problematic interaction of gender, politics, battle, and colonialism. This chapter seeks to light up Njinga's life, from her early years as a princess of Ndongo by way of her ascension to vigor and battles with the Portuguese, to her later years as a shrewd diplomat and spiritual chief. Her story just isn't purely considered one of resistance, it is usually certainly one of adaptability, innovation, and enduring legacy. The world into which Njinga was born, the dominion of Ndongo, a part of the broader Mbundu cultural region, was among the strong African polities that dotted the critical plateau of Angola in the late 16th century. Ruled by a king known as the Anjola, a title from which the present-day identifying Anjola is derived, Ndongo was a militarized, hierarchically geared-up society with complex ties to neighboring kingdoms corresponding to Congo, Matumba, and Kassan. By the time of Njinga's beginning, the Portuguese had already based a foothold in Luanda, a port city on the Atlantic coast. Their primary curiosity lay in controlling the transatlantic slave trade and exploiting Angola's wealthy interior. With superior weaponry, alliances with local opponents, and Jesuit missionaries in tow, the Portuguese posed a mounting risk to Ndongo's sovereignty. Njinga's father, Nolaki Luanji Kiasamba, was once the ruling monarch of Ndongo on the time. He led army campaigns against the Portuguese and maintained a precarious steadiness of vigor via struggle and diplomacy. Njinga's mother, reportedly a concubine or secondary spouse, belonged to the royal line and endowed Njinga with the legitimacy quintessential to enter the political fray later in lifestyles. From an early age, Njinga exhibited signs of sharp intelligence, rhetorical skill, and martial aptitude. Oral traditions recount her early coaching in the art of war, public talking, and statecraft advantage, mostly reserved for male heirs. Her title, Ingenga, is claimed to derive from the Kimbundu verb, kujinga, which means to curl, referencing the umbilical cord wrapped around her neck and beginning a strong omen amongst her humans. A princess amongst warriors, Ngenga came of age in the course of some of the turbulent durations in Ndongo's history. Portuguese army campaigns, pushed with the aid of the insatiable demand for slaves in Brazil and the Americas, devastated the interior. Villages have been razed, populations displaced, and traditional political buildings upended. Her brother, Mbandi, ascended the throne after their father's loss of life. However, his rule was once extensively seen as vulnerable and erratic. It was once for the duration of Mbandi's reign that Njinga first emerged as a bold political force. In 1622, as Portuguese encroachment intensified, Mbandi dispatched Njinga to Luanda to negotiate a peace treaty with the colonial governor, João Correia de Souza. The snapshot of Njinga on this moment, draped in regal finery, seated on equal footing with the Portuguese officers, allegedly having a servant kneel as a human stool to avert sitting on the floor, has ended up legendary. Njinga's diplomatic performance was nothing wanting masterful. She negotiated the consciousness of Ndongo's sovereignty, a cessation of hostilities, and the return of a few of her persons from slavery. She also changed to Christianity, taking the title Ana de Souza after her godmother, the governor's spouse, a calculated move to earn Portuguese belief and Christian legitimacy. Seizing the crown, regardless of the diplomatic success, tensions persisted. Mbandi, paranoid of Njinga's growing have an impact on, is claimed to have ordered the execution of her supporters and even her youngster. Whether or not out of ambition, vengeance, or an exact sense of responsibility, Njinga soon took concerns into her own hands. After Mbandi's suspicious death in 1620, rumors abound that Njinga had him poisoned. She assumed the title of Angola. Her ascension was once no longer uncontested. As a woman in a deeply patriarchal society, Njinga confronted inner opposition from male nobles who rejected the proposal of female rule. Undeterred, she consolidated vigor by means of a combo of traditional rituals, alliances with rival factions, and a growing navy force composed of loyal warriors and defectors. She additionally adopted male regalia, took on male titles, and even stored a harem of young guys dressed as female spics that stunned Portuguese. Chroniclers, however, have been understood in the neighborhood as political theater aimed at solidifying her rule. Struggle, betrayal, and exodus. Fragile peace with Portugal collapsed quickly after Njinga's ascension. The Portuguese refused to honor their agreements, resumed slave raids, and supported rival claimants to the throne. Dealing with overwhelming pressure, Njinga fled to the east and based a new base in the neighboring kingdom of Mata-Emba. It used to be right here that she converted from a regional monarch into a guerrilla warlord and revolutionary chief. Matumba, a culturally identical but politically special state, supplied a strategic refuge and a new energy base. Njinga quickly subdued regional rulers, integrated Matumba into her domain, and used it as a launching pad for a long time of resistance. From the 1630s to the 1650s, Njinga waged relentless war towards the Portuguese. She formed alliances with the Dutch, who briefly captured Luanda in 1641, and leveraged the ECU rivalry to her capabilities. Her forces performed ambushes, burned forts, and freed captives. At the same time, her diplomats maintained communication with the Vatican, European courts, and neighboring African states. Njinga's adaptability used to be unmatched. When navy drive failed, she became to marriage diplomacy, marrying a rival warlord to soak up his forces. When outgunned, she employed scorched earth tactics and psychological struggle. Her military integrated both men and women, a lot of whom owed their freedom to her anti-slavery campaigns. Legacy of leadership. By the 1650s, Njinga had modified Matumba right into a stable, centralized kingdom with a functioning forms, standing army, and diplomatic corps. She made peace with the Portuguese on favorable terms, making certain the continuation of her dynasty and the relative autonomy of her realm. In her later years, Njinga, considering rebuilding her war-torn territories, she re-embraced Christianity, funded church buildings, and put herself as a moral and religious leader. Some students view this as a specific religious turn, others see it as but a further calculated move in her lifestyles, defined by way of strategic transformation. When she died in 1663 at the age of 80, Njinga left behind a powerful kingdom, a permanent legend, and a tricky legacy. Her successors would struggle to hold the same degree of independence. However, her illustrations stimulated generations of African leaders and freedom combatants. Conclusive Queen Njinga's lifestyles defies handy categorization. She used to be a queen and a normal, a Christian and a traditionalist, a liberator and a ruthless tactician. She wielded power in a person's world with an unapologetic ferocity that unsettled her enemies and captivated her allies. Though generally absent from European-founded histories, Njinga's story is now being rediscovered with the aid of scholars, artists, and activists seeking to reclaim Africa's earlier. In the grand tapestry of history, she stands not as a footnote, however, as a towering figure, one who challenged empires, rewrote the principles of gender and leadership, and left an indelible mark on the sector. As we begin this sequence on Forgotten Kings and Queens, Njinga's story reminds us that historical past is richer, more difficult, and more inspiring after we see beyond the usual names and respect the rulers left within the shadows. When the identified Byzantine Empire is stated, thoughts more commonly flip to Constantine the First-Rate, Justinian and Theodora, or possibly Basil the Bulgar-Slayer. Yet amid these towering figures lies the largely forgotten, however profoundly impactful reign of Tiberius II Constantine, ruling from 574 to 582 Advert. He was once a transitional determined who helped stabilize an empire getting ready to collapse, laying the groundwork for Byzantine resilience in the centuries to come back. Though overshadowed by way of his predecessor, Justin II, and his successor, Maurice, Tiberius II's reign marked an interval of rare generosity, pragmatic governance, and modest however meaningful reform. His efforts to restore order to a fractured empire, keep peace with opposed neighbors, and ease the burdens of his topics deserve extra cognizance. In a world beset by means of plagues, religious schisms, economic strain, and foreign invasions, Tiberius stood as a beacon of unexpected readability and mercy. This chapter delves into the existence, rule, and legacy of Tiberius II Constantine, inspecting how his brief reign helped maintain the Japanese Roman Empire at a moment when its survival used to be a ways from guaranteed. The world earlier than Tiberius' main issue underneath Justin Iatha, 6th century used to be an unstable period for Byzantium, following the ambitious rule of Justinian I, who recaptured so much of the former Western Roman Empire. His successor, Justin II, inherited an overstretched and exhausted realm, unable to sustain his uncle's conquests. Justin II's reign, 565 to 578, was marked through economic pressure, uprising, and mental instability. Internally, the empire confronted rampant inflation, overtaxation, and a crumbling administrative procedure. Externally, threats loomed on every border. The Lombards pushed into Italy, the Slavs and Avars raided the Balkans, and the strong Sassanid Empire below Chasros I launched a brutal campaign alongside the Jap frontier. By way of the early 570s, Justin II's mental health had deteriorated to the factor of madness. Recognizing his incapacity, he appointed Tiberius, a competent and dependable army commander, as Caesar heir, obvious in 574. From this factor on, Tiberius became the de facto ruler. The upward thrust of Tiberius, a soldier, grew to become statesman-born. In Thrace around 520 AD, to a humble background, Tiberius had a navy career that brought him into the inner circles of vigor. His discipline, equity, and administrative capabilities made him a trusted ally of Justin II. Upon assuming vigor, Tiberius right away applied reforms to stabilize the empire. His first actions had been financial. He reversed unpopular tax insurance policies, dispersed imperial dollars to the terrible and the army, and diminished the charges of meals in Constantinople. These actions quickly earned him public want. His generosity was so profound that he won the nickname Tiberius the Giver. He understood that balance required standard aid, and he made deliberate efforts to ease the burdens of fashioned citizens and provincial populations, who had suffered below Justinian's relentless campaigns and Justin II's erratic rule. In 578, Justin II died, and Tiberius formally became Augustus Emperor of the Byzantine Empire. Tiberius's reforms and policies as emperor. Tiberius's reign used to be brief but bold. He reorganized the treasury and administration, bettering accountability and rooting out corruption within the imperial paperwork. In contrast to Justinian, whose centralization many times stifled regional governance, Tiberius motivated competent neighborhood leaders to take initiative. He made efforts to reconcile religious factions within Christianity. Though himself a Chalcedonian Orthodox, he dealt with the monophysites, more commonly persecuted, with the aid of prior rulers with top-notch tolerance, decreasing inner tensions and serving to unify the Christian East. Within the navy sphere, Tiberius balanced diplomacy with protection. He negotiated a fragile peace with the Sassanids by agreeing to pay a hefty tribute, purchasing time to reorganize the Japanese navy. He also bolstered the Balkan frontier towards Avar and Slav incursions, reorganizing command constructions, and reinforcing cities with extra garrisons and cash. One in every of his most lasting army choices was the appointment of Maurice, a skilled general, as commander-in-chief within the East. Maurice would go on to emerge as emperor himself, but below Tiberius, he started the process of rebuilding Rome's Jap defenses, challenges of the empire. A race in opposition to time. Tiberius ruled in an age of compounding crises. A devastating plague swept via the empire for the duration of his reign, killing 1,000s and weakening both city centers and the army. Meals shortages, induced by using each traditional mess-ups and warfare, created extra instability. Regardless of these pressures, Tiberius refused to raise taxes. Rather, he drew from the imperial treasury, selling his possessions and people of the palace to raise cash. This austerity, at the same time admirable, positioned huge stress on imperial budget, however received him the loyalty of both the army and original men and women. Tiberius additionally worked to fortify diplomatic relations with the Western kingdoms. He sent envoys to the Visigoths in Spain and tried to halt Lombard enlargement in Italy, though his success was restricted. Demise and succession. In 582, after most effective 4 years as emperor, Tiberius fell gravely, sick doubtless, from the identical plague that had ravaged Constantinople. Understanding his loss of life used to be imminent, he named Maurice as his successor, marrying him to his daughter Constantina to ensure dynastic legitimacy. Tiberius died peacefully on August 14, 582. He was once buried within the Church of the Holy Apostles in Constantinople. Maurice inherited a slightly stabilized empire with bolstered frontiers and a realistic administration, an empire rescued from the brink by way of Tiberius's stewardship. Legacy: a ruler lost in time. Tiberius, to Constantine, is in most cases relegated to the footnotes of Byzantine historical past. His reign lacked the drama of conquest or the grandeur of architectural wonders. He used to be now not a builder like Justinian, nor a warrior king like Heraclius, but his influence was once deeply gigantic. He ruled with restraint, humanity, and motive. He repaired the damage completed by using extra flamboyant predecessors, and quietly laid the foundations for future resilience. Without his reforms, Maurice would have faced a much more precarious empire. Ultra-modern historians have begun to re-evaluate his legacy in a global dominated by emperors who sought glory by means of conquest and divine desire. Tiberius stood aside, a realistic, sort-hearted administrator who understood that an emperor's genuine power lay in his career. To the men and women, conclusion: to Constantine might not be a household identifier, but his reign was once a turning point for Byzantium. In an age of darkness, he furnished gentle now, not by way of force or fear, but through compassion and reform. His story is a reminder that frequently, the finest leaders are those who serve with humility, and whose deeds echo no longer in triumphal arches, but within the quiet persistence of a civilization that survived against all odds. In remembering Tiberius, we find considered one of Byzantium's unsung heroes, a forgotten emperor who must be remembered not as a shadow, however, as a cornerstone of imperial renewal. In the golden age of the medieval Caucasus, when kingdoms clashed over mountain passes and empires jostled for manage of vital alternate routes, one lady rose to unheard-of heights and led her nation into an era of cultural brilliance and navy triumph. That girl was once Queen Tamar of Georgia, the first girl to rule the kingdom of Georgia in her own right, and one of the ambitious monarchs in Eurasian historical past. Quite often referred to as King Tamar by contemporaries to stress her authority, Tamar reigned from 1184 to 1213. Her period of rule is broadly famous because the Georgian Golden Age, time of army conquest, religious revival, and a flourishing of literature, artwork, and structure. But, regardless of her outstanding achievements, Tamar remains a slightly obscure figure outside of Georgian countrywide memory. This chapter explores the existence, reign, and legacy of Queen Tamar, whose strategic brilliance, devout piety, and unyielding unravel forged a multi-ethnic empire that stood as a beacon of Christian vigor in an area dominated by Islamic caliphates and Turkic Khanates. The sector of Georgia within the 12th century, located at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. The dominion of Georgia was uniquely centered, flanked by means of the Black Sea to the west and the Caspian Sea to the east, and hemmed in by way of the towering Caucasus Mountains. Georgia was once a land of fierce independence and strategic value. It served as a buffer zone and mostly a battleground between the Christian and Islamic worlds. By the point Tamar ascended to the throne, Georgia had already begun its ascent beneath her grandfather, King David IV the Builder, who reclaimed great territories from the Seljuk Turks and centralized royal authority. Tamar's father, King George III, persevered this consolidation of vigor. However, when George III named Tamar as his heir in 1178, many within the male-dominated the aristocracy balked. Regardless of this resistance, Tamar formally grew to be co-ruler, together with her father in 1178, and assumed full vigor upon his death in 1184. Her upward thrust to the throne used to be not only a matter of royal succession, it was once a combat to show that a lady might wield sovereign authority in a militarized, patriarchal world. The early years of her reign, struggles for authority. Tamar's early reign was marked through political unrest and courtly intrigue. Powerful nobles sought to curtail her impact, viewing her as a transitional figurehead to get replaced or manipulated. One among her first acts was once to placate the aristocracy. Through appointing relied on aristocrats to key positions, an act of compromise that bought her time to consolidate Vigour. In 1185, under pressure from her court docket, Tamar agreed to marry Yuri Bogolubsky, a Russian prince of the Rurikid dynasty. While politically nice, the wedding proved disastrous. Yuri was arrogant, abusive, and untrue. Within 3 years, Tamar had the marriage annulled, an audacious transfer. That bowled over overseas courts but solidified her manipulated residence. The annulment marked a turning factor, no longer bound to the need of overseas alliances or the aristocracy's expectations. Tamar asserted herself as King of Kings and Queen of Queens, a divine ruler, chosen by means of God, equal to any male sovereign. Military triumphs and territorial enlargement. Tamar's reign saw the expansion of Georgian impact past its typical borders. She launched a sequence of positive military campaigns, led by her loyal general and cousin, David Soslan, whom she later married. Below their command, Georgian forces defeated the Seljuk Turks, annexed Armenian territories, and secured key alternate routes through the Caucasus and Anatolia. One of the vital crowning achievements of her reign used to be the Fight of Bayezid in 1203, where Georgian armies decisively crushed a coalition of Muslim rulers from Asia Minor who sought to curtail Georgian expansion. The victory not best bolstered Georgia's army dominance but also underscored Tamar's repute as a Christian crusader queen. Tamar centered Georgian protectorates across the Caucasus, including in Trebizond, which grew to be a Byzantine successor state beneath her patronage. Her realm accelerated from the Black Sea to northern Iran and as a long way south as Japanese, Turkey, creating a Georgian empire in all but title. Cultural and devout Renaissance. Tamar's reign used to be no longer best a time of struggle but additionally of cultural rebirth. She patronized the arts, funded the construction of grand cathedrals and monasteries, and supported devout students. The Gelati Monastery, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, became a center of Christian finding out and scientific inspiration beneath her sponsorship. She can also be associated with Shota Rustaveli, Georgia's countrywide poet, whose epic work The Knight in the Panther's Epidermis embodies the chivalric and philosophical beliefs of the Georgian Golden Age. The poem exalts the values of loyalty, braveness, and divine kingship, traits epitomized by using Tamar herself. Tamar maintained shut ties with the Jap Orthodox Church and was canonized as a saint, now not long after her death. She was once known for her piety, humility, and experience of justice. Chronicles describe her as a monarch who governed with wisdom, confirmed mercy to enemies, and upheld the Christian faith in an adversarial vicinity. Death and legacy. Died in 1213, leaving behind a legacy unparalleled in Georgian historical past. Her death marked the top of the Georgian Golden Age, as subsequent invasions by way of Mongol forces and internal fragmentation step by step eroded the empire she had constructed. Yet Tamar's memory persisted. At the present time, she is revered as a national heroine and an emblem of Georgian identification. In religious iconography, she is depicted alongside saints and angels. Her political mannequin centralized authority, balanced through religious legitimacy and cultural patronage, formed Georgian kingship for generations. Despite her accomplishments, Tamar stays underrepresented in mainstream world historical past. Her story challenges stereotypes about female rulers in the medieval world and proves that leadership, imaginative and prescient, and braveness transcend gender. Conclusion. Queen Tamar of Georgia used to be a titan of her era, ruler who united fractious nobles, multiplied her realm, and presided over a cultural and religious renaissance. She did so now not as a consort or regent, however, as a sovereign monarch whose knowledge and will transform the fate of her nation. In an international, almost always blind to women in energy, Tamar forged a legacy that echoes by way of historical past. She reminds us that greatness will not be outlined by means of gender, however, by using the courage to rule with vision, religion, and unwavering conviction. As we proceed our ride through the forgotten rulers of history, Queen Tamar stands tall as one of the most brightest stars in a forgotten sky. Among the ranks of imperial China's many rulers, emperors comparable to Qin Shi Huang, Han Wudi, and Tang Taizong dominate the old narrative. But hidden in the grand palaces of the Tang dynasty, there once dominated a girl of unparalleled ambition, intellect, and ruthlessness. Was Xixin, the only lady in Chinese historical past to count on the title of emperor in her own proper. Her reign, spanning from 690 to 705 advert, marked probably the most controversial and transformative periods in Chinese historical past. Though demonized by way of later Confucian historians, Wu Zetian was a smart administrator, a customer of Buddhism, and a reformer who championed meritocracy in a generation dominated by way of aristocratic privilege. This chapter explores the upward thrust, rule, and legacy of Empress Wu Hao. She shattered centuries of gender norms, reshaped the imperial court, and left in the back of a dynasty that flourished long after her loss of life. Hers is a story of ambition forged in the crucible of palace intrigue, ideological conflict, and dynastic transition, from concubine to energy dealer. Wu's early lifestyles. Wu Zhao, later known as Wu Zishan, was born in 624 Advert for the duration of the Tang dynasty's golden age. Her father used to be an affluent Bush's service provider who provided his daughters with a schooling special for women at the time. Wu studied literature, music, and politics, setting up a keen intellect and unyielding ambition. At age 14, Wu entered the imperial court docket as a concubine of Emperor Taizong. She remained slightly obscure for the duration of his reign, but started out forming key relationships with palace officers and different consorts. Upon Taizong's loss of life, in 649, customized dictated that Wu retire to a Buddhist convent. Nevertheless, she soon lured back to courtroom, this time as a concubine of the new emperor, Gaozong Taizong's son. Her return was nothing wanting a political resurrection. Wu rapidly rose in desire, eclipsing Empress Wang and different concubines. In effect, in a courtroom identified for its bitter rivalries, Wu outmaneuvered her adversaries with a combination of allure, intelligence, and calculated ruthlessness. By using she had supplanted Empress Wang and been named Empress Consort herself. Consolidation of Energial Fao, formerly Best, the Emperor's consort, who soon grew to become the vigor behind the throne. Emperor Gaozong suffered from debilitating illnesses, allowing Wu to act as regent in all but title. She attended court sessions, issued edicts, and assumed manipulate over military and civil appointments. Her authority sparked controversy among Confucian scholars, who considered female rule as unnatural and destabilizing. Wu spoke back with a campaign to raise Buddhism as a counterweight to Confucian orthodoxy. She backed monasteries, commissioned religious texts, and offered herself as a residing bodhisattva, destined to guide the realm. To cozy her position, Wu purged courtroom, officers loyal to rival factions, secret police, anonymous informants, and exhibit trials grew to be hallmarks of her reign. Whilst these tactics earned her a fearsome popularity, in addition they eradicated systemic corruption and expanded the influence of gifted commoners in executive roles. Ascension to the throne. In 683, Emperor Gaozong died, and Wu Zishan grew to be Empress Dowager, ruling as regent for her sons, Zhongzong and later Riz. But these puppet emperors were mere formalities. In 690, after years of de facto manipulation, Wu declared the founding of a brand new dynasty, the Zhou dynasty, and proclaimed herself Emperor of China. The move used to be unparalleled and deeply controversial. For centuries, women had wielded casual power in dynastic courts, but in no way had one taken the mandate of heaven for herself. Wu claimed celestial omens and Buddhist prophecies as justification. She adopted the title Huangdi, simply as male emperors had, and reshaped court ceremonies, titles, and even the Chinese language to reflect her new order. Her Zhou dynasty would rule for 15 years, earlier than the Tang Restoration. However, during her reign, China reached new heights of prosperity, territorial stability, and administrative efficiency. Governance and reform. As Emperor Wu Zishan applied sweeping reforms, she multiplied the imperial examination approach, permitting gifted members from humble backgrounds to upward thrust via the ranks of the paperwork. This weakened the entrenched aristocracy and created a more meritocratic civil provider. She lowered the burden of taxation, supported agricultural growth, and instituted land reforms that benefited peasants. Below her leadership, China skilled relative peace and financial progress. Trade along the Silk Avenue flourished, and cultural alternate with crucial Asia intensified. Wu's court additionally grew to become a haven for poets, historians, and artists. Although her rule was marked by means of authoritarian manipulate, it was also a time of mental vibrancy and cosmopolitanism. Opposition and intrigue despite her accomplishments. Wu's reign confronted relentless opposition. Her upward push had created many enemies, especially amongst conservative Confucians and the deposed Temps aristocracy. Rumors swirled of her cruelty, her supposed use of witchcraft, and her manipulative character. Late in her reign, her courtroom grew to be embroiled. In scandal, her favoritism toward younger fanatics, especially the Zhongbros, alienated many officials and weakened her political base. Sensing vulnerability, Teng's loyalists maneuvered to restore their dynasty. In 705, faced with mounting stress, Wu Zetian abdicated in want of her son Zhongzong. She died later that year and was buried beside Emperor Gaozong within the Qinling Mausoleum. Below, a stele famously left Clint, perhaps a final comment on a existence too tricky for simple inscriptions, old memory and legacy for centuries. Wu's photo was once shaped by her enemies. Confucian historians depicted her as a usurper, a tyrant, and a seductress who defied the usual order. Her achievements had been downplayed, her personality vilified, but modern-day scholarship presents an extra nuanced portrait. A long way from being a mere schemer, Wu was once a visionary ruler who redefined what it intended to manipulate. She was once pragmatic, ruthless when quintessential, and deeply committed to the well-being of the state. Her reign represents a paradox, a time of repression and reform, of devout fervor and bureaucratic innovation. She broke one of the most deeply held traditions in Chinese civilization, the exclusivity of male emperors, and did so with audacity, intelligence, and statecraft. Conclusion: Wu Zetian's story is not considered one of quiet, have an effect on, however, of overt and unapologetic energy. She claimed the mandate of heaven in a global that insisted she might now not. She reshaped the Chinese language empire in her photo and proved that greatness might come from the most unlikely of figures. As we explore the lives of historical pasts, forgotten kings and queens, Empress Wu stands out, not just for her singular role in Chinese history, however, for her enduring impact on the probabilities of leadership, gender, and legacy. In reclaiming her story, we reclaim a richer, more inclusive history of vigor. In the grand narratives of world history, Korea's cultural and scientific triumphs ordinarily go not noted beside the towering legacies of China and Japan. But throughout the early 15th century, one monarch improved the Korean kingdom, of Joseon into a mental and scientific beacon, King Sejong the Great. Although commemorated inside Korea, Sejong remains mostly unfamiliar to the wider world. His reign used to be not marked by using bloody conquest or political chaos, but through an unwavering commitment to enlightenment, justice, and national identification. This chapter uncovers the life and legacy of King Sejong, who reigned from 1418 to 1450. He championed education, pioneered scientific developments, and famously commissioned the construction of Hangul, Korea's specified alphabet. His men and women from centuries of Chinese language linguistic dominance, his rule offers an imaginative and prescient of governance situated on knowledge, inclusivity, and human dignity. The Joseon dynasty and Sejong's ascent. King Sejong used to be born Idu in 1397, the third son of King Taejong, the founder of the Joseon dynasty. Although no longer in the beginning destined for the throne, he grew extraordinary himself by way of intellect, humility, and a ardor for scholarship. In 1418, his elder brother voluntarily stepped aside, allowing Idu to ascend the throne at just 21 years. Historic, his early reign used to be characterized through political prudence. While he revered the Confucian aristocracy that buttressed Joseon governance, Sejong was unafraid to venture founded norms in pursuit of justice and reform. He surrounded himself with wonderful scholars and inspired open discourse at court. In frequent departure from rigid hierarchy, governance rooted in Confucian ideals. King Sejong was a devout follower of Confucianism, but interpreted its principles via a humanist lens. He believed rulers will have to serve their topics with empathy and moral readability. Underneath his rule, Joseon's legal and administrative systems have been revamped. He oversaw the compilation of the Gyeongguk Dajin, a complete legal code that balanced royal authority with bureaucratic ethics. Sejong's strategy to governance was once evidence situated. He headquartered the Corridor of Worthies Jifianjin, a think tank of the generation that included students, scientists, linguists, and ethicists. This group, not simplest, aided policy choices, however, grew to become instrumental in advancing Korea's scientific and cultural achievements. Champion of the humans, education and language reform, King Sejong's most enduring legacy is the invention of Hangul, the Korean alphabet. Earlier than Hangul, literacy used to be restricted to the elite, who used classical Chinese characters elaborate overseas and inaccessible to commoners. Sejong viewed this linguistic barrier as a profound injustice. In 1443, he commissioned a group of scholars to create a phonetic alphabet that mirrored the Korean spoken language. Accomplished in 1446, the new script used to be named Honminjinjim, meaning the correct sounds for the guide of the folks. Hangul consisted of 28 simple characters established on the shapes of the mouth and tongue when announcing them. It was progressive, logical, effortless to learn, and fantastically structured. Predictably, nobility resisted, viewing the script as a hazard to their cultural monopoly. However, Sejong stood firm, proclaiming, "A shrewd man can be trained it. In a morning, an idiot can learn it in 10 days." Today, Hangul is widely known as one of the crucial scientific writing systems on the earth, a testimony to Sejong's foresight and egalitarian ideals. Scientific advancements underneath Sejong believed that expertise should serve practical needs. His reign saw a surge in innovation. Clocks and calendars, with the help of Jang Yong-sil, a genius inventor of humble origins, Sejong presented water clocks, sundials, and celestial globes that expanded timekeeping and astronomy. Agricultural manuals. He commissioned the Non-Sajixiel, a comprehensive farming advisor that expanded food construction and helped rural communities adapt to Korea's numerous climates. Education and wellness. Sejong supported the compilation of the Haengak, Gypsy, an indigenous clinical textual content that integrated Korean folk cures with Chinese medicine. Sejong's scientific investments weren't mere self-importance projects. They reflected his deep obstacle for the welfare of common folks. Cultural renaissance and army prudence. Even though no longer a conqueror, Sejong understood the value of safeguard. He strengthened the northern borders, in particular against Jurchen tribes, and enhanced naval capabilities to deter Japanese pirates. Nevertheless, he favored diplomacy and inside fortification over expansionism. Culturally, Sejong's technology used to be a golden age. Poetry, portrait, track, and philosophy flourished. He encouraged ladies' education, reformed slavery, legal guidelines, and increased the status of marginalized businesses. His reign became synonymous with justice, motive, and flourishing civilization. Dying and historical reminiscence. King Sejong died in 1450 at the age of 53. Leaving at the back of a career extra positive in its identity than ever before. Despite opposition from conservative nobles, his contributions continued. Later, kings tried to suppress Hangul. However, the alphabet survived among commoners and was once finally embraced as Korea's national script. Latest, Korea reveres Sejong as a countrywide hero. His snapshot seems on the 1001 bill. Countless associations, cities, and research centers undergo his name, but past the Korean peninsula, his story stays underappreciated. Conclusion. King Sejong, the exceptional rule no longer with the sword, however with the pen, no longer by means of terror, however by means of working out. In an international, the place rulers are frequently remembered for conquest. Sejong's legacy lies in empowerment. He democratized literacy, developed science, and ruled with a watch towards justice. As we seek to recognize the forgotten monarchs of history, King Sejong's reign presents a profound lesson. Genuine greatness lies now, not in domination but in elevation, in lifting others to their best possible advantage. When history speaks of the Ottoman Empire, the names that echo via time are those of conquerors and warriors: Suleiman, the amazing; Mehmed, the conqueror; Selim the grim. Yet hidden beneath the thunder of cannons and the march of armies lies the quiet yet profound legacy of a ruler customarily lost sight of: Sultan Bayezid II ruling from 1481 to 1512. Bayezid II is largely remembered, when he's remembered at Ols, the son of Mehmed II, and the daddy of Selim I. However, this perception does disservice to a reign characterized by way of consolidation, reform, and humanitarian, imaginative, and prescient. Bayezid II was once no longer a warrior king, but a builder of peace and protector of persons. Together with the numerous Jewish refugees fleeing the Inquisition in Spain, this chapter unveils the story of Bayezid II, a sultan who prioritized balance over conquest, diplomacy over destruction, and abilities over glory. It explores how he preserved the Ottoman state through turbulent succession, internal dissent, and outside threats, all whilst fostering a tradition of tolerance, studying, and civic reform. The shadow of greatness. Bayezid's early existence was once born in 1447 in the city of Demetica, contemporary-day Greece. for the duration of the height of Ottoman enlargement beneath his father, Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople. Growing up in a palace teeming with students, squaddies and statesmen, Bayezid received a classical Islamic schooling in theology, jurisprudence, languages, and the arts of management. As a young Prince Kezid, Bayezid was once assigned to control various provinces, normal coaching for Ottoman heirs apparent. His governance of Amasya, a key Anatolian province, furnished him deep insights into provincial administration and exposed him to numerous populations of Muslims, Christians, and Jews. There, he won a fame for equity, piety, and modest dwelling, contrasting with the brutal pragmatism of his father. The battle for the throne when Mehmed II died in 1481. A fierce vigor wrestle erupted between Bayezid and his younger brother Sem Sultan. While Bayezid's declare was once more suitable, Sem had support from several Anatolian factions and staged a rebellion. The rivalry culminated in a civil warfare that might have fractured the empire. Sem fled and sought support from the knights, Hospitaller, on Rhodes, and later from European courts. At the same time, Bayezid consolidated vigor at residence. Sem grew to become a political pawn in the hands of the papacy and more than a few European monarchs, who saw in him a device to stress the Ottomans. Bayezid, rather than escalating the clash, pursued diplomatic channels. He provided payments to the papal court docket to ensure Sem remained in captivity, as a consequence neutralizing a detrimental rival without incurring bloodshed. Though controversial, this transfer preserved the fragile cohesion of the empire. Governance and reform. Bayezid's reign was marked now not by way of enlargement, however, by using inside reform. He invested closely in administrative reorganization, reinforcing the centralized timur method and curbing the autonomy of provincial beys. He expanded tax assortment, streamlined the judiciary, and reinforced the janissary corps, guaranteeing that they remained loyal and good-expert. In urban centers like Istanbul, Idrin, and Bursa, Bayezid sponsored titanic architectural initiatives, mosques, libraries, public baths, soup kitchens, and caravanserais. These weren't simply expressions of imperial piety, they had been designed to support civic existence and stimulate monetary pastime. He additionally worked to stabilize foreign money and alternate combating inflation and curbing corruption within the forms. Under his guidance, the empire's treasury grew, and the infrastructure multiplied in ways that facilitated no longer conflict. However, peace, the Jewish refugees and religious tolerance of the outstanding episodes of Bayezid's reign was his response to the Alhambra Decree of 1492, when Spain's Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella expelled the Jews from their territories. Even as much of Europe closed its doorways, Bayezid opened his empire's ports. He dispatched the Ottoman navy to rescue enormous quantities of Sephardic Jews from Spain and Portugal. These refugees were resettled in cities like Istanbul, Salonika, and Izmir, where they revitalized commerce, science, and the humanities. Bayezid is alleged to have remarked, "You call Ferdinand a wise king, he who impoverishes his nation to counterpoint mine." Bayezid's acceptance of the Jews used to be no longer only humanitarian. It used to be strategic. The immigrants introduced with them advantage of European finance, remedy, printing, and trade networks belongings the Ottoman Empire would harness for decades. This act of tolerance stands as some of the ahead-pondering policies of the time, primarily in contrast to the brutal religious purges taking place within the Christian kingdoms of Europe. Cultural flourishing. Bayezid was a client of the humanities and sciences. His court attracted scholars, astronomers, poets, and theologians from throughout the Muslim world. The Sultan himself used to be a calligrapher and poet, writing beneath the pen name Adli. Below his rule, the empire noticed the development of really good complexes, just like the Bayezid Mosque in Edirne, which included a clinical institution and one of the vital evolved hospitals in Europe on the time. Right here, song remedy and holistic medication were practiced centuries ahead of their rediscovery within the West. Bayezid additionally backed translations of Greek and Latin works into Arabic and Ottoman Turkish, continuing the legacy of intellectual curiosity that had defined Islamic civilization for the period of its golden age. Legacy and succession. Hindrances. His achievements. Bayezid's final years had been marred by means of familial strife. His son Selim, later referred to as the Grim, used to be an ambitious and militaristic prince who believed his father's policies lacked the aggressive spirit quintessential for Ottoman Survival in a quickly militarizing world. In 1512, after giant strain and civil unrest, Bazid abdicated in prefer of Salim. Days later, Bazid died en path to his retirement in Damascus. He was buried in Istanbul beside his mosque. Difficult. His legacy rapidly overshadowed through Salim's conquests and Suleiman's golden age. Conclusion: Sultan Bayezid to may, on no account, be remembered with the identical reverence as his extra-belligerent relatives, but his contributions were foundational. He preserved an empire on the point of division, embraced a policy of inclusion, and promoted an imaginative and prescient of Islam, rooted in tolerance and finding out. At a time when the arena was once increasingly defined by devout intolerance and imperial ambition, Bayezid II stood as a quiet but powerful exception, a forgotten peacemaker who believed that the real force of a ruler lay not in the battlefield, however, in the flourishing of his individuals. In remembering him, we bear in mind an extra style of vigor, the vigor to heal, to build, and to embrace the honor of all humankind. In the highlands of present-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, the place the purple sea winds kiss the mountains and deserts, once stood a mighty African empire largely forgotten via world history, the dominion of Aksum. Between the 1st and 7th centuries, Aksum used to be one of the crucial satisfactory powers of the ancient world. It traded with Rome, Persia, and India, minted its own foreign money, and adopted Christianity centuries before most of Europe. And amongst its many rulers, King Caleb Ella Asbiha, who reigned in the early 6th century, stands as one of the vital, top-notch, revered in each Christian and Islamic traditions. King Caleb used to be now not just a monarch, he used to be a saint, a conqueror, and a defender of the religion. Yet despite his international importance, few external the Horn of Africa consider his title in these days. This chapter explores the reign of Caleb, his holy battle in Yemen, his alliance with Byzantium, his abdication, and the religious legacy that echoes quietly by means of time. The upward thrust of Aksum by means of the 6th century. The dominion of Aksum had already centered itself as a dominant force in East Africa and the Crimson Sea area. Its strategic area allowed it to manipulate key exchange routes between Africa, Arabia, and the Indian Ocean. Aksumite retailers dealt in gold, ivory, frankincense, and slaves, and the dominion had developed a written script, and minted gold and silver cash bearing Christian symbols. Aksum's conversion to Christianity occurred within the 4th century under King Azana, making it one of the earliest formally Christian states on this planet. By the point of Caleb's reign, Christianity was deeply woven into the dominion's identity. Caleb saw himself not simply as a king, however, as a divine instrument of God's will. The Yemen campaign, a crusade earlier than the Crusades, Caleb's most famous military motion, was once his crusade in southern Arabia, certainly within the kingdom today's day, Yemen. The Himyarite ruler, Dunuas, a Jewish king, had begun persecuting Christians in his domain, primarily in Najran. The place massacres of Christian communities shocked the Christian world. The Byzantine Emperor Justinian I, who shared religious and economic ties with Aksum, is believed to have appealed to Caleb to intervene, whether out of religious responsibility, geopolitical ambition, or each. Caleb launched a seaborne invasion across the Pink Sea around 525 Advert. The Aksumite army, bolstered by elite troops and potentially Byzantine naval aid, landed in Yemen and overthrew Dunuas. The crusade was swift and decisive. Caleb set up a Christian viceroy, Sumyafa Ashwa, to govern the region, making sure the protection of Christians and Aksumite effect over significant Pink Sea exchange routes. A world Christian Caleb's intervention in Arabia marked some of the earliest examples of international Christian unity. His alliance with Byzantium showcased a broader Christian ecumene, stretching from Constantinople to East Africa. Letters from Syriac, Greek, and Coptic sources praised Caleb's devotion and valor. In lots of approaches, this was once a prototype of the medieval crusades, launched not from Europe, however from Africa. And unlike many future campaigns justified in religious terms, Caleb's warfare used to be remembered, even by using Islamic historians like Ibn Ishaq, as just and noble, abdication and sainthood. Following his victory, Caleb returned to Aksum and dominated for just a few extra years. But in a dramatic and distinctive act for the time, he abdicated the throne and retired to a monastery. Sources fluctuate on his causes. Some cite a want for religious purification. Others say he used to be upset with the aid of the hindrance of retaining manipulate over Yemen. Caleb's abdication brought to his charisma of sainthood. He became venerated within the Ethiopian Orthodox Church as a saint and holy man, and his name was enshrined in each religious texts and oral culture. The monastery where he spent his ultimate years became a pilgrimage. Website. His successors struggled to preserve Aksumite manipulate over Arabia, and ultimately the Persians, after which the Muslims supplanted Aksumite, have an effect on. Nonetheless, Caleb's navy and religious legacy persevered. Rediscovery and historical forget about. Despite his remarkable achievements, King Caleb is hardly ever stated in mainstream old narratives. Western historians have long lost sight of Aksum, ordinarily because of Eurocentric biases and the misconception that sub-Saharan Africa lacked historic civilization. But archaeological proof from monumental stelae to inscriptions and coins. Another story. Caleb's coinage, mainly inscribed with crosses and bearing his title, testifies to his popularity as a ruler of worldwide value. His name appears in Byzantine files, and his deeds are chronicled in Islamic texts. However, nonetheless, his legacy remains obscured in the 20th century. Renewed curiosity in African history resulted in rediscovery. Historians and archaeologists began piecing collectively Aksum's story, and Caleb's name as soon as again rose from the ruins. His campaign in Yemen is now famous as a turning point within the devout and political historical past of the Pink Sea area. Legacy. King Caleb's legacy is multifaceted. As a monarch, he increased Aksumite influence past Africa. As a warrior, he defended his religion against persecution. As a spiritual determinant, he renounced worldly power in pursuit of divine truth. His existence challenges many assumptions about African history and Christian history alike. Here was a black African king who led one of the most earliest documented devout interventions throughout continents. He was once a protector of Christians, an ally of emperors, and a pioneer of international diplomacy. In reclaiming Caleb's story, we honor no longer just a forgotten king, however, a lost chapter of worldwide historical past, one where Africa used to be now, not a periphery, but a robust middle of faith, have an effect on, and vision. Within the grand and glittering history of the Mughal Empire, the names of emperors like Akbar the Nice and Shah Jahan in general overshadow the reign of Jahangir, a ruler whose 22 years on the throne marked a targeted fusion of inventive brilliance, political complexity, and individual contradictions. Jahangir, born Nuruddin Muhammad Salim, was a monarch whose legacy is etched no longer, best in the annals of empire instructing, but additionally within the refined brushstrokes of miniature artwork, the resonant verses of poetry, and the tricky balances of courtroom intrigue. Although historical past commonly remembers him certainly because the son of Akbar and the father of Shah Jahan, Jahangir's reign used to be in a generation of cultural flowering and administrative challenges that formed the trajectory of the Mughal dynasty. His deep appreciation for art and nature, his struggles with governance and household discord, and his relationship with the powerful Nur Jahan, all weave together to color a portrait of a ruler as intricate because the empire he governed. This chapter seeks to discover the multifaceted life and reign of Emperor Jahangir, exploring his early life and tumultuous route to the throne, his patronage of arts and architecture, the gentle politics of his court, and the enduring marks he left on the subcontinent's history. Early existence and turbulent ascension. Born in 1569 within the imperial city of Fetefar Sikri, Nuruddin Muhammad Salim was once the fourth son of Akbar, one of the formidable emperors in world historical past. From an early age, Salim confirmed a powerful will and unbiased streak, characteristics that will each help and complicate his route to vigor. Not like his father, whose reign used to be characterized by means of strategic growth and devout tolerance, younger Salim used to be restless and typically at odds with the court's expectations. His childhood and adolescence had been punctuated through acts of uprising towards his father's authority, together with two serious insurrections that saw him in short take up hands towards the empire. These rebellions stemmed from both individual ambition and frustration with the constraints of imperial protocol. Regardless of these conflicts, Akbar did not sever ties with his son, however, saved him inside the royal fold. Might be recognizing the difficult nature of management and the importance of a strong heir After Akbar's dying in 1605, Salim ascended the throne, taking the regal identified Jahangir, meaning conqueror of the sector. His coronation was both a second of individual triumph and the beginning of a reign that would test his expertise, as each an artist and a ruler. Jahangir's courtroom, a nexus of artwork, tradition, and energy. In all Jahangir's defining legacies lies in his distinctive patronage of the humanities. His court grew to become a brilliant hub for painters, poets, calligraphers, and musicians, blending Persian, Indian, and European influences right into a certain Mughal aesthetic. Jahangir was deeply enthusiastic about nature, birds, animals, flowers, and the altering seasons. His love for ordinary historical past translated into commissioning one of the vital, most awesome Mughal miniatures ever created. These artwork went beyond mere ornament. They served as unique scientific studies of natural world, capturing textures, colors, and behaviors with an unheard-of level of realism. Underneath Jahangir's patronage, Mughal portrait developed its possess identification. The royal atelier, staffed by using master artists corresponding to Mansur and Abel Hassan, produced works that mixed tender brushwork with a cosmopolitan working out of light and shadow. The emperor himself from time to time tried his hand at painting and calligraphy, emphasizing the intimate connection between art and governance. Moreover, to visible arts, Jahangir supported literature and song. He composed his own memoirs, the Tuski Jahangir, an invaluable supply that presents insights into his thoughts on justice, politics, and personal experiences. His court echoed with Persian poetry and classical Indian tune, reflecting the empire's cultural syncretism, governance, and administration, balancing culture and innovation. Regardless of his inventive passions, Jahangir used to be equipped, if typically inconsistent, administrator. He inherited an empire that used to be immense, various, and usually fractious. Retaining control required deft political maneuvering, principally inside his court. Jahangir persevered a lot of policies of religious tolerance and centralized governance. The Mansabdari process, a army administrative framework that organized ranks and duties, remained central to keeping loyalty among nobles and navy commanders. Nevertheless, Jahangir's reign used to be also marked through internal court docket, rivalries, factionalism, and transferring alliances. Probably the most influential figures was once his wife, Nur Jahan, who emerged as a powerful political operator, with ease guiding imperial policy and appearing as a co-sovereign in lots of respects. Her sharp mind and diplomatic potential helped stabilize Jahangir's rule during intervals of weak spot, but additionally sowed seeds of resentment amongst different nobles. Military challenges continued, including rebellions by means of Raj princes and tensions in the Deccan region. Jahangir managed these with various success, often main campaigns in my opinion and other occasions delegating to depended on commanders.